Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cat B and Andy B Inspired Connections podcast. We are coming to you transatlantic from the UK and the US. Without further ado, let me welcome my beautiful co-host, Cat B, and our very, very special guest today, author and fellow Shining Light parent, Mark Ireland. How are you all doing today?
Hi, Mark. Hi, Andy. Great to see you guys. Mark, you're one of the co-founders of Helping Parents Heal. Tell us about your journey because it's quite spectacular, and tell us a little bit about some of the inspired connections and things that have brought us all together.
Sure thing. Well, thanks for having me on. In terms of going back way before Helping Parents Heal existed and kind of what took me down this path, I had an unusual upbringing because a lot of people have later in life, because of circumstances or passing of a loved one, discovered these phenomena, mediums and near-death experiences and all these different phenomena suggestive of the survival of consciousness after physical death, or the continuity of consciousness, I guess I would say. I actually was raised by a father who was a psychic and a medium way before this stuff was popular or part of mainstream culture. So he was really a trailblazer in many ways. His name was Richard Ireland. He was initially a part of the Spiritualist Church Association, the NSAC in the U.S., and traveled around and then founded his own interdenominational or non-denominational church, and then branched out of that because he really wanted to touch people in the secular world to expand their thinking beyond just like, hey, we're just a brain and a body, but that we're more than that. So he would do psychic demonstrations in public venues and even nightclubs, TV shows, all kinds of places. I'm fortunate enough to have some recordings of him on like the Steve Allen show in 1971, where he does a psychic demonstration, which is pretty mind-blowing because I don't know anyone alive today really that does what he did. But he was also a really gifted medium. And I think it was growing up, seeing that part of it was the most intriguing for me, because he might be doing a psychic demonstration, but then just all of a sudden, spirit would touch in with them and he'd share messages with someone that he was speaking to. And it was very detailed, the name of the person who had passed, the nature of the relationship, some concrete information that would attest to their identity, whether it be hobbies or mutual likes or foods or whatever. And so as a kid, I just thought, wow, there is more than this. It seems like, I don't know how it works, but there's obviously more. And that person still exists in some form. So
That's lovely, Mark, because I've seen some of the clips that you posted, and if the viewers wanted to search them, there are a few online, aren't there? He's going to correct you, though, and say Dr. Richard Ireland. That's what every time I write your dad's name, he always says to me, excuse me, Kat, you forgot the doctor bit. I never know whether he was a real doctor or not, or what the doctorate was for, Mark.
he was fine with the doctorate. I think, and that's one reason I've held it back, because I just don't want people asking like what university or whatever. But it's funny because I think he's pushed me to, because I was in Europe a few years ago and there were these tour buses, and on the side it said Dr. Richard. I have no idea what company that was, but yeah. So, but having said all that, I never really aspired to be my father or be the next version of him. He always told people I was very psychic, and I did have psychic episodes and things that were pretty profound at times. But it's like, I guess as an adult, you want to form your own path, and I did. I went the conventional path, business world, got a degree, got married young, had 2 kids, both boys. But it was actually my youngest son, Brandon's passing when he was 18, that kind of drew me back, because I was obviously devastated, like most parents would be, with this unexpected passing. And then there was just a series of things that opened up, like a breadcrumb trail that I was led down, that got me back into this, meeting a lot of really top mediums like yourself and researchers and other folks in the field, and writing a couple of books and being handed a manuscript my dad wrote that never was published, that I was able to get published, and stuff like that. And then, so all of that was prior to Helping Parents Heal, but it was actually, I think in January 2010 or thereabouts, that I was doing a workshop. I was kind of promoting my book, but it was also sharing some of my dad's training materials. And during a break, a woman approached me when she says, "Hey, my name's Suzanne Wilson. I just moved to Arizona from Florida, and I came here because I wanted to meet like-minded people." And she says, "I've just, I'm ironically met a woman whose son also passed on a mountain. And my son, Brandon, passed on the McDowell Mountains in Scottsdale, Arizona. We didn't know the cause of his passing at the time, but it did turn out to be a severe asthma attack." Elizabeth Boyson was the person Suzanne was referring to, and her son had been in the Himalayas on a school trip with the University of Arizona, and they had taken this bus up too rapidly, and he got altitude sickness and caused him to pass. But anyhow, Suzanne said, hey, I met this other parent whose son died in a similar manner. I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I gave her a copy of my first book, Soul Shift, which looks like this, and said, why don't you give her a copy? And I wrote a little inscription and gave her a card. I said, if she wants to talk to me, I'm happy to speak with her. Wasn't more than a day or two later, I got a call from Elizabeth, and she said, hey, I read your book. I loved it. I want to meet you and your wife. And so we got together shortly thereafter, and she said, hey, I've got this Facebook group called Parents United in Loss, and I'm going to have my very first in-person meeting in about 2 weeks. Will you be my inaugural speaker? And I said, well, sure, no problem. So 2 weeks later, I go to this, I do a talk. There's probably 30, 40 people there, and it went pretty well. And she started having these meetings about once a month. And I would go to as many as I could. I didn't go to all of them, but I went to many of them. I think it was then in 2011, I was changing jobs and I was talking to another medium friend. By this point, I already knew dozens. Tina Powers, who's a good friend and a good medium in Tucson. She said, hey, Mark, I think your own mission in life is to help other parents who have been through what you've been through. So maybe you could think about how to start an organization. So I have to give her some credit, too, for the formation of this, because she kind of planted the seed. And I started thinking to myself, Elizabeth already has something that works, but the only problem is it's just one location, and she doesn't have a website, and she doesn't have a newsletter. So I approached her and said, hey, would you be interested in maybe taking what you've started and blowing this thing out and partnering with me? I'll help you build a website. I'll help you put together a newsletter, and then we can blueprint what you do in your meetings and then expand it out to see if other people in other cities and locations want to do this, and maybe change the name to something like Helping Parents Heal. And she says, oh, I love that name. I didn't like the other name. It was too much of a downer. So she said, let's do it. And, here we are more than a decade later, and we have 31,000 members worldwide, 165 chapters. And we have this conference every other year that draws, 1,100 people. So it's just mind blowing how that came to be. And on a side note, without running on too long here, there's a chapter in my first book, Soul Shift, called The English Connection. And there's a medium, she's now retired, who lives near London, Linda Williamson, who at the time I had a reading from her in 2004 that basically predicted all of this, told me that this massive falling would happen, this big organization would come about, and all I had to do was really just be myself and tell my own truth. And this was just going to happen. You can't push the timing of it. It'll happen when it's supposed to happen. But it was really amazing to go back over that material now and read everything she said that did come to fruition.
I met her too, and she's lovely. One thing that is really kind of interesting is that each of the pivotal moments, you met a medium or somebody that had spiritual connections that inspired. So whether it was Suzanne Wilson joining you at the table, introducing you to Elizabeth, or Tina actually disclosing, like, this is a good idea to make this organization, and then it going further with Linda's reassurance. I just love these little touch points, Mark, that kind of
Well, there's so many of them. And even with you, like, I think you saw some interview I was on or heard it, and then you...
No. I had a really weird experience. Let me tell you a little bit about how I came across Meet You, because it was bizarre. It really is. And somewhere in our ancestral, I'm sure in our Yorkshire connections, because your great-grandfather's got a Yorkshire connection, we've probably got some ancestral connection somewhere where family members were friends or something. But I remember I was sat in my kitchen, Mark, and I had my laptop, and Spirit asked me to leave my job in maybe the April and May of that year. And they'd asked me to do everything that we ask you to do, we need you to do. Even if you feel like you want to say no, we need you to follow and just trust what we give you. And some of the things were really like menial things, and some of them were really extremely extraordinary things that I wanted to get involved in. And so I did everything that they said. But by the November, I was like, hey, come on, guys. A high-profile head of buying role where I've been a retail executive, flying around the world. I'm used to working like full-time. And this is all great, but it doesn't look like the framework that I'm used to. And then Spirit said, go click on your laptop, look up this guy's name. And I put your name that was given to me into the internet, and I put the word medium next to it. And this information came up about you. I didn't know that there was an association to a charity. even though I'd been told by an English medium, as you'll hear in the interview with Elizabeth, that I was looking for a charity because they told me that that was where I needed to get into. And you call it non-profit in the USA, but I call it charity. But so it's a little different. Across the pond, we've got different terminology. I literally, and I didn't know who you were, what your background was. I didn't know that you were certifying mediums. I didn't know anything. I just was told, contact this guy. So I remember reaching out, Mark, and writing and thinking, this is the craziest thing I think I've ever done in my life. In the back of my head, I was like, I've gone to a certain level of crazy, but this is probably the highest level of crazy I've ever gone to. But then in the back of my mind, Spirit said, well, he can only say no, or he can only ignore the email, but he didn't. To my shock, contacted me within less than 24 hours and said, right, we'll set up a Zoom and I'll talk to you tomorrow. I remember thinking, and then that day was even more interesting, the day that I was due to meet you, because I think I said to you, once you explained to me what you did, I think I said to you, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if that, my vocation should, I don't know. Let me read for you. And if you think that I have a decent quality, I'll go through your testing system, because you actually test and certify mediums very successfully. And we'll come to that in a moment, Mark. But I actually was working for a friend of mine, and all that day, Spirit had been inspiring kind of music of like Elvis Presley to Frank Sinatra, and they only ever wanted me to listen to these kind of songs. And when I was coming down the motorway, this really amazing motor car, like a vintage, really classic, impressive car, came and drove alongside me. And he didn't seem to want to overtake me. He seemed to want to drive alongside me. And I thought, that's really weird. Looking at this car, sort of slowing down, trying to interject in front of me, and it wouldn't. And at the time, it was a Frank Sinatra song that was playing. And I took a wrong turn off this motorway that I know really well. So this was a kind of inspired connection. And they took me to a location that has the name Donald in it. And it wasn't McDonald's, I promise you, it was a farm. And I took this wrong turn, and all I could do was stare at the name Donald. So I thought, that's really weird. They seem to want to put or sow that seed of that name into my awareness. And that's what I remember. And I remember coming back up thinking, this must be connected to this conversation. Still a little bit confused as to the full scope of what you did and what you were embarking on. Because at that stage, you were in the early stages, I think, of embarking on the bigger project that you've now taken on. And so that's how I met you. And I remember when I met you, these little moments like the name Donald, the songs and the synchronicities about the vintage cars all started to connect with who your father was. And I realized that I had known your father in a different guise through the different connections, and that he'd actually been popping in every occasion to sort of teach me little things, not as a main guide, but as somebody coming in to teach me about consciousness work and work when I did trance work. I was aware that his interest was in greater consciousness and how a medium surrenders to trance and physical mediumship, which he's now been exploring a little bit more. So I was fascinated, Mark. So that's how I came to meet you. I didn't see your books. I didn't see your YouTube. I came afterwards as I started to research, like, who is this guy I've just spoken to? So it was kind of cool. I liked our introduction, Mark. It was mystical, to say the least.
Well, you mentioned that mediumship certification program. I started that a little over 10 years ago. And really, my goal there was, after I first got into this, I started meeting a lot of top shelf mediums from around the world, but some of them were really kind of famous and had long wait lists, or maybe what they charged was more than some people wanted to pay. And I thought to myself, there have to be other people who have this ability who are just lesser known. And that's where it started. And today I've got over 40 on the site that have been certified. And now Helping Parents Heal also has a provider list. And then I have to vet the mediums before they can get on there. And by the way, Kat tested at the very highest of the people that have been through the program. But I will tell you too that I've actually turned the wrench on the protocols about 4 times now to make it more and more difficult. And in fact, the last change of protocol just happened 2 weeks ago, because what I found was that, I was placing a lot of it on accuracy, correct answers, and evidence second. So I've kind of flip-flopped it. So I need more evidence and not just correct answers. Because you could say, oh, your grandmother loved to bake. Well, yeah, most grandmothers love to bake. I'm sorry. That is correct, but it's not evidential, Now, your grandmother loved to make lasagna for Thanksgiving. Okay, now we're talking about evidence. So anyhow, I've restructured that, and I'm going through the process of taking the original results from each medium and running them through that to see if they pass, and I'm going to put a gold star by the ones that do. I haven't done you yet, but I'm confident that you'll have it because I know you went off the charts on the evidence piece. But I think the reason I did that, quite frankly, is because I found there were a number of people right on that borderline of passing who, they were accurate, but when I really looked at it, it's like, the evidence isn't strong enough. And I really this is a resource for grieving people. And I wanted it to be so that, the mediums on there are going to be highly evidential mediums. And that was what was important to me. So I keep refine it. And I think I'm finally there in terms of the best formula, but everybody on there has passed the protocols based on what they were at the time that they applied.
There's a few things that I just want to say there, Mark, that's really interesting. So a lot of people say there's a lot of charlatans out there, but that's not necessarily the truth. There's a lot of people out there that think they're better than they are, or perhaps do a workshop or, do a few courses and they think, right, I'm a medium. In fact, I don't think by coincidence, Andy's had a similar experience where somebody reached out to him and said, oh, I'm a medium, and went on to deliver a message that was very controversial. And, as somebody who teaches people, I find it very interesting that what some people think is acceptable isn't really evidential. And you have to work at this like a muscle and really build your superpower to really legitimize yourself, but also to heal, because that's the end game. It's not really about the ego element, although you do need a certain amount of ego to stand up. It's about the difference that you can make to an individual, and that professionalism, potentially even more so because of the controversy around mediumship in the past. We need to be ambassadors and lift the quality that's been delivered to really help support this as a healing tool. And I think that's something that you've really championed, Mark, in your protocol and your processes. But also, you didn't meet a lot of frauds in the process. You met quite a few people that felt that they were better than they were. Is that fair to say? I don't want to be...
Yeah, you're right on the money. I think first off, what some people might consider a fraud would be somebody who just doesn't have that level of ability. I would say, in the last 20 years, I probably encountered 2 cases of fraud, not directly, not people applying for my program, but I figured it out through other means, and I won't mention names or circumstances, but I would say, conversely, I've seen dozens of people try to get certified who just didn't have the ability. And I think, a common thing I'd hear is, oh, I went through so-and-so's courses, or this or that. I really think, with the father I had and how I grew up, and I think it's more an innate ability first and foremost, that the very best people, it's just a natural part of who they are. It is, a key element to them. So they can develop to a higher degree. Like my dad, he was just born with this. It was observed by my grandmother when he was age 3 and especially at age 5. But then on later in life, he was mentored by somebody who had the ability and he took it to another level. You could take somebody with just very little ability and they could go through all the courses in the world and they'll be okay. Take somebody who's natural that doesn't have that and they're going to blow them away. You take somebody who's got the natural ability and refines it, like you said, flex that muscle, work on it, and it gets better and better. But like you said, I think, there are a lot more deluded individuals about that, or that for whatever reason, they want that. I want to be a medium. I want, maybe because unfortunately, some of them want the fame, but I think a lot more of them want to help. They want to help in a way, but maybe that's just not their role in life to help that way. And they just think it is, or they want it to be that way, but it's not that way for them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Controversially, I wasn't born a medium. I wasn't natural like your dad. I had levels of intuition. So I was intuitive and I was a very caring individual. I was always wanting to help the underdog at school and things like that.
It was innate in you. You were suppressing it.
Yeah, maybe. But it took an incident to bring that out. And so I do think that if somebody's got the natural leaning, and there's another thing about your process that I want to sort of highlight as well, which I have been very aware of, and I can say this now because she's now been certified on your group. But I met the lovely Kathy McManus, who's coming on the podcast in a few weeks' time. And Kathy came to London when she was training. We both trained with similar teachers. Because although I had an experience after the diving accident, I refined it and I've worked on it and worked on it, and Kathy did too. I remember knowing that she was going to pass your test even before she'd even applied for it, because we met after we'd been for dinner. We came out of this restaurant in London, and suddenly this guy started singing the Frank Sinatra song that I associate with your father. I mean, he literally went into full-on operatic musical in front of me and Kathy. Now, Kathy didn't know that was a sign for Dr. Richard Ireland, that was my personal sign. I won't say the song because it's different to your song with him, but it's my personal song that I associate with him. I don't want to say it in case other people replicate it. But this guy went into full out musical. I started to laugh and I said, Kathy, you need to apply for Mark's certification class, because this is the sign that his father wants you certified. So I also feel that spirit side, there is guidance, Mark. I think people are guiding people that are appropriate for the process. They're going to pass, and I know, because Kathy's just listed onto your certified that she passed the test. So I also love that kind of little extra gold seal of approval that comes from spirit side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I actually have something funny to share about the story about the Frank Sinatra thing. So if you go back to right after Brandon passed, I'll just give a little precursor here. I'll try and make it as fast as I can. I was watching the evening news in Phoenix on the NBC affiliate, and they showed an excerpt about a mediumship study being done at the University of Arizona at the time, separating the medium from the sitters and having them do blinded readings, basically. And then they would recoup the information from the sitter afterward to see the level of accuracy. And so it was really impressive. And the medium they featured was Alison Dubois, before the show Medium ever hit the airwaves. And she gave a lot of specific information to these people. And at the back end, they were like, oh, yes, this was accurate. And yeah, the guy, he liked to go to Vegas and gamble at the craps table, or, that kind of stuff. And I thought, geez, I'd love to get a reading from her, and I'd love to be in that lab. But little did I know both those things were going to happen. It was just a question of when. And the very next day, I got a call from a man named Jerry Concert, who was a friend of my father's. And he said, hey, Mark, I know what you've been through, and I know someone who might be able to help you. Her name's Alison Dubois, and here's a phone number you can call for a reading. And then I got in the lab about a year later. But that's another story for another day. Where I was leading with this is when I had the reading with Alison, she gave me a couple of affirmations. One that was really crazy was, 2 weeks before I'd met with her, a man gave me a box. Inside was all these 8.5 by 11 pages typed. It was a manuscript called Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development by Richard Ireland. And 2 weeks later, I meet with Alison, and one of the first things she says to me is, your father's here, and he's showing me a book, but I think it's his book, and he's handing it to you to take forward. Do you know what that means? I'm like, yeah, I do think I know what that means. And in 2011, I actually was able to get it published. Posthumously.
It's one of my favorite books. I've read it several times.
But where was really the punchline for this was, so Alison said, your dad gives me the Frank Sinatra song, Fly Me to the Moon. So whenever you hear that, you'll know that he's there. So it was probably just a few years after that. We were out to dinner at an outdoor restaurant in Scottsdale with another couple that we knew, and they had a live musician there, a singer. He was setting up. He hadn't sung anything yet. And so it was October 16th of that year. That's my dad's birthday. And I said, well, I'd like to make a toast to my dad. Today is his birthday. And I do that. And immediately the singer starts singing Fly Me to the Moon.
And now, isn't that amazing? I remember you telling me that story, and it gets even better. I went round to a friend's house and she served me a mug of tea in England. And the mug said, Fly Me to the Moon on the front of it. And I said, just go have a pitch. I go send it to Mark. It's an inspired connection. I just got really excited, and it's funny how these little things take wings. They have wings, don't they? They just have wings, and these are the magical moments that the divine timing to them, you just can't. Have you had some experiences like that, Andy?
Well, the one thing that I wanted to share, Mark, you and I have not met yet. I'm one of the affiliate leaders for Helping Fathers Heal. So I'm kind of tip of the spear kind of thing, interacting with the new dads. And what I think is very critical, and it, if our listeners have any takeaway, I think the service of, what Helping Parents Heal does with the providers, what you do with your certifications is critical, because as a consumer of, mediums and, psychic, I've worked with a lot of incredible providers all through Helping Parents Heal, a couple of them non-certified out. There is a huge difference. Like you said, there are people that I think have very good intentions and, maybe their connection is good. But, one of my pet peeves is when I hear, usually it's the not certified person say, oh, your son misses you and loves you. And I'm like, well, come on. That's not, I mean, that's true. I believe that's true, but that's not something that I want to, pay for, things like that. And so when I'm talking with the dads, particularly in our dads group, it's if you're going to go to a provider that's been certified and that is in, helping fathers or helping parents heal, because I've seen the reverse. I've seen people spend very hard-earned money on people who, maybe the connection wasn't great, like I said. And there's an emotional pain that you go through when you have your hopes up and you're like, I want to talk to my son. I want to talk to Josh. I want to know what's going on. And then you hear very general or very, veneer kind of comments that could be true for anybody. So yeah, from the guys in the trenches, we are definitely making sure that new dads understand there is a difference and it's worth researching.
Yeah, and men are typically more skeptical anyhow than women on average. So, it's going to be harder to make that work. And it's fine to say your son loves you and misses you if there's evidence along with that,
Exactly.
Well, the other thing I'd say to that is there's always going to be time when a good medium has a bad day as well. So they will either, if they've been certified through the process, the other thing is I think there is a code of ethics or moral sort of capacity where people will say, well, I'll refund you because I didn't get you the right information, or I'll reschedule you and we'll try again on a different day. I think there's a different quality of approach, Mark. And I think that comes from really the sentiment that you've set and the background that you give when people go through your process and the realization that there is a definite responsibility. So I think, we can all have a difficult day. It is a human natural connection, as you've spoken about. But of course, if the human body has got illness one day or something's happened, it's going to affect the system that's communicating. And there are always those moments. And sometimes you're not always fully aware. I know that another colleague of mine said, one day she was dehydrated and she couldn't get the connection. She realized it was her immediately and rescheduled the reading. So you do get these moments and they are generally normal. But what I love about the process that you've set is that it raises the bar. It sets a standard, which is beautiful.
Yeah. And to your point, even the majority of the ones that passed, they had to do 5 blinded readings. A lot of them had one bad one, or it wasn't maybe bad, but it just wasn't great. At least one bad one or one off one. So it's never guaranteed, but I think the code of ethics is important. I don't mandate it, but I highly expect the mediums that I've certified that are on my site that I've set up, because my name's attached to that, for them to provide a refund if they have an off day and they don't have a good session.
Well, and I guess for clarification, I don't mean to be trashing mediums. There's just a difference because I've worked with certified and non-certified. And my point as a consumer is there is a difference.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's good to know. That's really good.
Well, there's a number of ones that I know, like I said before, there's a number of ones that I know that aren't certified because they were already too busy. You talk about Farah, you talk about the 2 Suzannes, there's some really good people out there. Tina, I've not even asked them to go through this because they don't really need that. I know the real deal, and I've had readings from some of them too. But yeah, you're right. There is a big gulf there, if you will, between the really good ones. And that's who I really want people to have. And again, the reading with a good medium is not the end all be all. It's just a piece of the puzzle of the healing process. There's other factors. It's one piece. I don't want people to become addicted like a heroin addict, where they're wanting like 6 readings in a month, or anything like that. It should be spaced out, maybe once every 3 to 6 months is maybe healthy. Anything more than that's kind of pushing it, I think.
Well, the other thing, though, is that you pair it with good grief coaching and counselling and other healing guides, as it is only one element of a bigger picture, and people navigate to what they're drawn to and what works for them. And I also think that that's important, that people don't have to take mediumship as a healing process. It's just one tool in the bag should you feel energetically inspired, but it can make a massive difference. But so can some of the other healing tools that are out there. And I think it's worth people casting their net wide, feeling out what works for them, and then sort of tuning into that. I've also, it's interesting though, the thing about once or twice a year. I agree. I don't have many clients that come to me more than twice a year. Occasionally there is maybe two people in there that have asked specifically, no, I want to have this connection. And I almost feel, and maybe I'm kind of slightly biased, Mark, that like in life, we should be able to have as many conversations with spirit as we want. We should be able to, it should be as natural as everyday life. Now, those conversations don't have to come through a paid medium. They can come through the training that somebody gets themselves, their personal mediumship, their personal connection. But I think the spirit world, if I'm really honest, would love to be treated as naturally as everybody else in life. And if they want to talk to us, sometimes the people in spirit will jump in to talk to me more frequently than I reach out to them. And so I like the idea that, I absolutely agree with your point that you don't want to become dependent on it. And that is dangerous. I don't think that is the right attitude. But I think if you can develop the connection for yourself.
Yeah, that's a different deal too, I think. Like in my dad's book, he talks about, I think like ancient humans had this innate intuition that probably was spirit guided. Like, okay, I need to go over here to hunt for my food today, or look out, there's a bear over there, those kinds of things, where they didn't have iPhones, they didn't have televisions, they weren't distracted. We're so distracted by all the sensory stimuli in our world today, in our lives. It's crazy.
Yeah,
and
true.
The best people at this, like my dad, when he was a kid, he didn't have any of that. He just was out in the woods. So it was quiet time. It was connecting with nature. So just a whole different kind of life. So I think individuals can develop that too. And that's a healthy thing, to have that direct kind of connection, whether it be to feel, your kid, they're connecting with you, or whether it's just for guidance in your own life. And, I found like if I just rely on my gut, it's right more often than if I overanalyze things. If I sit here and try and dissect things and analyze them, it's not often as correct as just my gut tells me this and I'm going to do that,
I'd go even further in my life. There's been things where I thought I was going in the right direction and spirit was going, and telling me to go in the opposite direction. And I almost had to be tested that, will I be loyal to spirit or will I go with my own direction? And every time, if I fail to go with spirit, I get it wrong, Mark. So, sometimes I think by developing your own intuition, your own mastery of it, you're absolutely right. You don't have to be a medium. You don't have to be to connect, but you can make better decisions. You could be kept healthier, safer, because you have a greater level of awareness. And that awareness can keep you safe at the end of the day. It can help you make better decisions that prevent you from being in the wake of harm. It's like the other day when I was on the motorway and I felt I'd taken a wrong turn. Like spirit just inspired me to take a turn off the motorway. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like taken as like first of all, I'm thinking half an hour out of my way. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm into traffic lights now, roadworks. It's going to be an hour extra on this really long trip. Only to find that actually, had I not taken that wrong turn, I would have been in the center of one of the biggest pileups on the A1N. And that has been there for quite some time. So you see that actually this intuition guided me, and that there are no wrong turns when you work with spirit. It's fascinating in a way. And you realize that actually, saved myself hours and a lot of heartache. Fortunately, there was no major. I think one person was taken as a casualty to hospital, but the pileup was huge. The actual potential was, there was a lot of material damage and people's lives were definitely affected that day in different ways. It is incredible, isn't it? And I know your dad had that experience, didn't he? Didn't he have his car roll backwards?
So, actually, I was just going to bring that up because you kind of teed that up for me. But he told a story about, I think it was in the 1950s. He was driving from Ohio to the west. I'm not sure where he was headed, but he was in Colorado going through the mountains. And he was about to come to a corner where you turn the corner, and his car just stopped. It wouldn't start. It wouldn't run. He didn't know what was going on. He got out of it. And then he walked down a ways around the corner and he looked and there was a huge boulder that had fallen. And had he continued on at full speed, he would have run directly into the boulder. Thereafter, the car later started and ran. So he had that. That was even maybe more dramatic because it involved like a physical happening, along with the mental part of it. Like usually he would get a warning or something, but in that case, it was just like, it just happened.
If you listen to her podcast, Mark, it's amazing. The same thing happened to her. She was actually guided to get into a car just as an accident happened, and it protected her and her now living son. And when he got his cancer, you were pushed over by spirit. And that's how he found the cancer in his body, which is just incredible. And wouldn't have found it had that not happened. So we get these little moments. They are amazing, aren't they? They're really like awe-inspiring.
Now, I'm going to give you a question out of left field. Susie was looking at, I think, Facebook today, and you made a post about a willow. And we think that might be for us. But what did you think about willow?
I can't remember, but stuff flows through me, Mark. To remember the things that I write. Spirit will inspire me, a wave of energy will come over and I'll write something. So then I'll send it to you. That's the best way. It's on my little Facebook page, but I'll send you the message.
Yeah, that's our younger granddaughter.
Maybe that's come up for a reason, actually, because your dad plays tricks on me. So Andy probably doesn't know the full story of, like, your dad tends to come in to teach me things. And I've had some amazing moments with him. I was once in Scotland and I knew that there was a baby due, but I didn't know that he'd named it Willow. And I was literally I was in this gift shop in Scotland, and suddenly I was tuned into this candle that said Willow across it. So I remember thinking, it means something, and like listing it, and then speaking to you later in the day, finding out and discovering that your granddaughter had been called Willow. And so I bought the candle for you and Susie, and I sent it. Now, when I ordered the candle, I ordered my favourite scent, which was completely different scent to the scent that arrived. And the scent that arrived, I was a bit like, oh, it's not the scent I ordered. And I remember, I think it was peppercorn and I can't remember the other blend that was in it. But I remember Susie calling me to say, how did you know it was my favourite scent? And I was like, I don't think I did. I think Richards affected the delivery so that those candles arrived. So there's little moments like that. But I've been in the house. I remember one day he shouted the name Virginia Woolf at me, and I was like, Virginia Woolf. And of course she's a writer, but he said, look her up. So I looked her up and I thought, what's that got to do with mediumship? And it tuned into the word stream of consciousness. And he said, that's what's happening when I'm contacting you. We're working with the stream of consciousness energy. And I noticed once that I was with Ava, and Richard shouted something at me. He shouted, if you think you've missed something, you can always go back to the start. And it felt like 60 seconds later, but perhaps it was only a few seconds later, Ava then said, I never spoke it out loud. My daughter then said, Mum, if you think you've missed something, you can always go back to the start. And it was also the wave of energy, it hit me. And then it taken a little bit longer to travel to Ava, and it hit her, and she intuitively, as a child, just picked that information up in the ether, if you will. And maybe he did it on purpose to repeat it so that I would pay attention to what he was saying. But in this instance, he then guided me to an American psychologist.
I think I know who you're talking about.
He studied transmediums. I can't remember his name now. That's terrible, isn't it?
William James.
William James, that's it. He then went from this and he said, now look at William James and read about him. And of course, this guy studied transmedium. So it was fascinating to kind of see the research. But he'll often do things like that or teach me about consciousness. I remember, like Ava, I remember being in a playground, and I always associate your dad with a cowboy hat because of him being a rancher in his early days. And he did come through on the platform at Finley College to a medium for a message for me to deliver to you after this young man had said, guides never come through on the platform. And of course, your dad likes to push the boundaries, doesn't he, Mark, and sort of prove actually that's not necessarily true. And he came through on the back of my grandfather coming through. They could share an interest in horses, but your dad took it a stage further than my grandfather and had a ranch. But in London, seeing a cowboy hat when the trend is not there is unusual. And I was in this park with Ava, and suddenly this cowboy walked in, and I was like, that's really weird. And I thought, okay, he's wanting me to pay attention to something. So I'm looking around thinking, what's going to happen next? When my husband comes into the park and he says, God, I've just taken an amazing photograph. And I just knew. I was like, he's taken a picture of a guy in a cowboy hat. I just know it. I just know it. And sure enough, he's all excited. And he's like, look at this guy's outfit. And I was like, oh my gosh, he is a cowboy. He's a guy in a cowboy hat. Now, Ava's at the other side of the park, Mark, playing on a climbing frame. She was maybe only 4 or 5 at the time. And suddenly she bursts out singing the Rhinestone Cowboy at full whack. I was like, what are you doing? What is this? And he said, well,
Channeling Glenn Campbell.
yeah, it was like literally. Sometimes he was just trying to explain to me that consciousness can be wide. You can be in more than one place and omnipresent at the right time. But when you touch somebody, that awareness is going to filter through perhaps initially their most open modality. Now, her husband loves to take photographs. Ava loves to sing. And so when his consciousness touched Stuart, it made him take a photograph. When it touched me, it made me look to the left and see the guy walking through the park with cowboy hat on, which I might not have noticed if I hadn't been tuned in on some level. And then he touched Ava, and it caused her to sing a cowboy song, or a cowboy-related song. I find that fascinating, Mark.
My uncle, Robert, he had similar abilities to my dad, and he lived much longer than my dad did. So he was there for me after Brandon passed. But I remember in 2004 him talking to me about development and the role of meditation and how to meditate. He says, but don't meditate while you're driving. Never meditate while you're driving. Well, 4 years later, 6 years later, whatever, I was talking to Debbie Martin, who's a friend of mine, a really good medium, Deborah Martin. And I can't remember what we were talking about. All of a sudden she says, don't meditate while you're driving. I'm like, oh, that's my uncle. She says, I'm supposed to tell you, don't meditate while you're driving. Who would come up with that? That's my uncle.
Yeah, it's just mad, isn't it? He's the Donald. Now you've got a Robert, haven't you? Donald.
He's Robert.
He's Robert. But the Donald.
Donald. I have a brother, Donald, and also one of my dad's brothers was a Donald.
Bless, and is it Brandon's middle name as well?
That's right. Yeah. Well, the reason was we wanted to name him Brandon Blake, which we did, but he got 2 middle names because we had 3 Donalds to satisfy in the family. Susie's dad, Susie's brother, and my brother. Ironically, her brother's name was Donald and sister's name is Robin. My brother's Donald and sister's Robin.
Isn't that mad? You get these little synchronicities in the family. Yeah, I remember. And then that's why I realized that he'd taken me to the farm. I was like, oh, that's crazy. Because I think you tested me. I think you said to me, give me Brandon's middle name.
Yeah, I don't even remember doing that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you said, yeah, but see if you can get my son's middle name. And I said, I think it has to be Donald because of the farm connection.
Before we put a wrap, I wanted to just change subjects for a second and thank you, Andy, for your contribution because it's really critical. I will tell you, going back a number of years, Elizabeth and I tried to get something going with men and helping parents heal because really all of our meetings and everything we were doing is like 95% women. And I knew that the reason for that is men are just built differently. They're not as open to express their emotions. They're kind of closed off. They're supposed to wear the rugged, man jacket and just take their lumps and all that. And so we tried many different ways, and Mike Edwards really created a breakthrough. And it took a while. Initially he had meetings with, 4, 5, 6 guys, and I would be in a lot of those.
One of them. Andy was one of them. He was there from the start.
Yeah. And so thank you for that and for hanging with it. But, it took time, but finally there was enough inertia to kind of push it forward. And now it's a really big, important, viable group that's a branch of helping parents heal. So I just want to thank you for that.
Dads on last night, night before last on Wednesday. We had 60 dads, and we regularly had about 40.
Because you're on a lot of those meetings with them too, so thank you for that.
It's a way that I honor Josh. It's a way that I honor what Spirit has taught me, through working with Kat and, with other providers and helping parents heal. It's a way for me to give back, and it's an honor, and I love to do it. It sometimes can be a grind, but that anything worth doing is worth overdoing, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure that the dads who are new to it, really, they're in a tough spot, and that's where you have hard work to do, and it just takes time.
Yeah. No, thank you.
It is beautiful. I like going to their meetings, Mark, because they give you a harder time. Not a harder time in terms of energy. They are sort of there listening, but they want that extra nugget, or they want that extra piece of
Prove it.
I really, got to work hard to prove your stuff, and it's lovely. They're a good bunch of guys. That's my finding as well. It's nice that you've got a real mix of personalities and differences, and that it does build a different energy. I find it really is different to the main groups. I love working for both of them, but I have to say that there's something special, maybe because of the Mike Edwards connection with helping parents heal.
Yeah.
When it comes
Well,
to
thank you so much for all you've done too to support the parents from the whole thing, no matter which part of it, and just for being a good friend to me.
I love you. You can share your little picture if you want to. You can mortify me.
All right.
We went to Germany together. I'm sure there's more to the synchronicity. But Mark's always wanting to go to the beer festival. There we are. Look, we got dressed up. We did helping parents feel proud. I changed the costume when it arrived. I was like, this feels a little bit small. There we go. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's something that we should share. And as much as we joke about it, great friendships are formed. Elizabeth calls it collateral beauty, but there is one thing that is really amazing about this organization, and that is you can go anywhere in the world and you will always have a friend. You will always meet somebody who you know, and you can explore the things you love. And, I don't think we talked much mediumship or healing on the trip. We enjoyed ourselves as any other person would. And I never experienced the beer festival in Munich. And I thought it was immense. And to get you on a fairground ride, it's just clap in the air when you're scared of heights was really good fun. So,
yeah, but didn't go too high, but it was fun.
No, we didn't. But it's a lovely community spirit, and I know Andy's found that as well, because Andy's met up with lots of people outside of the group, and we're going to Canada and meeting loads of people in Canada as well. So there's some incredible. I think that's beautiful. It's like there is just some kind of profound connection between people who have experienced similar things, and that's I think that's something special that your community that you've created has had an impact and an effect on Mark, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's definitely, I have what I call the 5 pillars of healing, and that's one of them, being able to meet other people who can relate to you, who have been through what you've been through. Because if folks haven't, it's no matter how good their intentions are, it just doesn't work,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we'll have you on again, but thank you so much for being here and introducing yourself. Well, I say, so I understand that you're writing a new book. You've started a new project.
I've been working on one for a while. There was a literary agent in New York who works with John Holland, and she a few years ago suggested that I should write a book about what it was like for me to grow up with the father I had. So that's what I've been working on. It's been kind of slow going because I've already told a lot of those stories in my first 2 books, but there's still more nuggets to be had there. Plus, over the last several decades, I've had people contact me from around the world with accounts of their experiences with my father. So I'm going to include those as well. And there's some new material there that's never been read before or known about. So I'm still working on it, but that's kind of the next project going forward.
Amazing. I'm being told don't be frightened to repeat some things because some people won't have read it. They won't see it as repetition in the different context.
Okay, cool. I'll probably do that then. Maybe not all of it, but some nuggets here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great talking to you.
Thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure, but lovely to see you.
You too.